A small man with great power. That is how many described Nikolai Yezhov, the most brutal executioner of the Stalin era. At just 151 centimeters tall, he seemed inconspicuous, but it was he who became the main symbol of terror in the 1930s. Before he came to power, few people knew about him. He was born into a poor working-class family and received almost no education. In his youth, he worked as a locksmith and in factories. During the 1917 revolution, he found himself in the right place and joined the Bolshevik Party. From that moment on, his rise began. He was not a brilliant theorist or military man, but he knew how to make himself indispensable. He always agreed with his superiors and tried to please them. He was called a faithful executor. He had a good sense of what was expected of him and always acted in line with the party. Within the apparatus, Yezhov rose quickly through the ranks. In the 1920s, he took charge of personnel control, which meant that he decided who would be promoted and who would be dismissed. He behaved like a gray cardinal, but even then it was clear that it was better not to anger him. His real rise came in 1935, when he became Stalin's assistant on personnel issues. Stalin valued the most important thing in him: absolute loyalty and a willingness to do any dirty work without asking questions. In 1936, Yezhov became head of the NKVD, the main directorate of state security. And then began the nightmare that went down in history as the Yezhovshchina. But it was at this moment that he felt he was at the top. He eliminated competitors and controlled investigations, courts, and camps. All decisions went through him. But despite all this power, Yezhov did not even have a legal education. He did not know the law, but he signed death warrants without hesitation. Many feared him more than Stalin himself, and anyone who tried to argue with him soon disappeared. And yet, despite the fear he inspired, his end was near. His rise to power was rapid, but just as quickly he found himself on the very list he himself had signed. In the summer of 1937, the most terrible period of repression in the history of the USSR began. It would later be called the Great Terror. It was then that the country first truly learned the name of Nikolai Yezhov. He became the head of the NKVD and turned the authorities into a death machine. The repressions were carried out according to pre-approved norms. The center sent figures: arrest this many people, shoot this many. These were called limits. If local Chekists exceeded the plan, they received bonuses, certificates, and promotions. If not, they could find themselves under investigation. In essence, a manhunt began. Everyone was arrested indiscriminately: workers, peasants, engineers, writers, scientists. The charges were formulaic: enemy of the people, spy, saboteur. No one demanded evidence. The main thing was to extract a confession. To this end, torture, threats, and pressure on relatives were used. The NKVD turned into a terrifying mechanism. Employees competed with each other to see who could uncover the most cases. One investigator could interrogate dozens of people in a single night. Sentences were signed in batches. Everything was about speed and quantity. Just think about it. In 2 years, from 1937 to 1938, according to official data, about 600,000 people were shot. That's more than the entire population of a large city. And the total number of repressed people was more than 1.5 million. Many of those who carried out the executions later became victims themselves. The machine of terror devoured its creators. One day you were an executioner, the next you were under arrest. Such a system could not exist for long without consequences. Yezhov himself did not just observe. He personally controlled the course of operations. He demanded that repression be intensified, that the lists of suspects be expanded, and that no one be trusted, not even those closest to him. His signature was on tens of thousands of death sentences. He called everything that was happening cleansing the state of enemies. But in reality, it was mass terror that destroyed the lives of millions. People disappeared without trial or investigation, often simply because someone wrote a denunciation out of envy or fear. When Nikolai Yezhov became head of the NKVD, fear came not only to ordinary people, those who had sat at the same table with him yesterday, those who belonged to the highest circles of power, also began to fear him. The fact is that Yezhov did not limit himself to arresting ordinary citizens. He began to destroy his own colleagues, comrades in arms, and old Bolsheviks. Moreover, he did so not simply on orders from above, but often on his own initiative. He took an active part in the cases against the former head of the NKVD, Heinrich Yagoda, and Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky. Yezhov did not simply carry out orders, he himself oversaw the fabrication of charges, sought out witnesses, and obtained confessions. The signatures on the false protocols were also his. After Yagoda was arrested, many realized that neither rank, nor friendship, nor past merits would save them. Anyone could be next. Stalin saw this and did not interfere. Yezhov became a convenient tool of intimidation for him, but gradually he began to act too independently. Some historians believe that he began to use his power to remove even those who did not arouse Stalin's suspicion. Panic broke out among his associates, ministers, commissars, military generals. Everyone understood that if Yezhov had his eye on you, it could be the end. People in the Politburo, knowing how easy it was to fabricate accusations, began to fear even the slightest hint of suspicion. At the end of 1937, Yezhov felt like the master of the country. His power seemed limitless. He decided who to imprison, who to shoot, who was worthy of life, and who was not. Even members of the government tried not to look him in the eye. The fear of him was so strong that people whispered his name only in the kitchen. Yezhov reported directly to Stalin. He could go to him without waiting in line, dictate who to dismiss and who to promote. For a time, he became the most influential figure in the USSR, after the leader himself. He lived lavishly. He had a personal office in Lubyanka, decorated in the highest class. But most importantly, a separate restaurant was created for him inside the NKVD building, to which no one had access except his closest associates. Secret parties were held there where they drank, had fun, and discussed the fates of thousands of people. The rumors were very dirty. Yezhov organized drunken orgies, inviting arrested actresses and girls from creative circles. He promised them freedom and careers, and then blackmailed and mocked them. Rumors of this even reached Stalin, who made harsh remarks to Yezhov. But at the time, Yezhov did not pay any attention to this. He thought he could do anything he wanted. He surrounded himself with people who hung on his every word. They reported only what he wanted to hear. He was not interested in the real problems in the country. He was interested in only one thing: continuing the repressions, raising the plans, and expanding the camps. At that moment, Yezhov truly believed that he was untouchable, that Stalin could not manage without him, that if people feared him, it meant they respected him. He did not notice the most important thing: how quickly the mood in the Kremlin was changing. Stalin was cold. He never revealed his cards ahead of time. And while Yezhov was throwing parties, the leader had already begun to look at him with suspicion. When Yezhov first began his mass repressions, Stalin turned a blind eye. He remained silent when thousands were shot. He did not interfere when old Bolsheviks were arrested. Everything was going according to his plan. But at some point there was too much bloodshed, so much so that no one could control it anymore, neither society, nor the army, nor the party itself. Stalin understood that if he continued, the system would simply collapse, and he needed to find someone to blame. The easiest thing to do was to pin it all on the executor, on the one who was already up to his ears in it, on Yezhov. While Yezhov was relaxing in private restaurants and throwing parties, Stalin was already crossing his name out of group photos. Right there in the newspaper editing room, they began cutting him out of pictures as if he had never existed. It was an alarming sign. Rumors of his imminent downfall reached Yezhov himself. He began to panic. According to the recollections of his contemporaries, he told his friends and lovers, "I'll soon find myself in the basement." He understood everything, but it was too late. Stalin did not forgive those who began to act independently, and Yezhov had started. He created his own vertical structure in the NKVD, appointed people without approval from above, and covered up for those who participated in torture. The leader decided that a man capable of destroying so many people was dangerous, even if he was loyal. Today he serves, but tomorrow he may betray. When it became clear that Yezhov was no longer needed, Stalin began to act quietly. He did not cause a public scandal. Everything was as he liked it, quiet, harsh, and without a trace. He chose Lavrentiy Beria to replace Yezhov. Beria was already in the system. He headed the NKVD in the Caucasus. He worked precisely, accurately, kept a low profile, and did not throw drunken parties like Yezhov. Most importantly, he knew how to listen and not argue with his superiors. This was exactly the kind of person Stalin was looking for. At the end of 1938, Beria was first appointed Yezhov's deputy. Formally, he was there as a backup, but in reality, things were different. He was already compiling files on Yezhov's subordinates, drawing up lists of unreliable individuals, and monitoring their conversations and actions. It was like a real coup, only without the gunfire. While Yezhov was still formally at the head of the NKVD, his people were already being dismissed, arrested, and deported. And in his first months on the job, Beria arrested nearly 4,000 NKVD employees who had been appointed by Yezhov himself. It was a purge, swift and ruthless. Yesterday's executioners suddenly found themselves in prison. In February 1939, Yezhov was summoned for a talk. At first, he thought it was just a formality, but he soon realized that it was all over. He was arrested, isolated, and interrogated by the very man who had previously called Yezhov his teacher, Lavrentiy Beria. He personally interrogated his former boss. Without pity, he knew how the system worked, and now he was using it against the man who had created it. Yezhov was placed in solitary confinement. There were no windows, no clocks, no books, no connection to the outside world. His name disappeared from all documents, newspapers, and archives. It was as if he had never existed. He spent almost a year in complete isolation, without communication or walks. During this time, he became a different person. There was no trace of his former confidence. He was no longer the tough leader who commanded thousands of lives. Now, sitting in front of the investigators, was a man who cried, begged, and complained. During the interrogations, Yezhov initially tried to defend himself. He said that he had done everything on orders and that he was not to blame. But he was interrogated professionally and ruthlessly. At some point, he broke down completely. According to the records, during one of the interrogations, he shouted, "I am nothing. I am dirt under your feet. Do whatever you want with me." This was said by someone who, just recently, had ordered the killing of hundreds of people a day. He betrayed everyone. He talked about his assistants, colleagues, mistresses, trying to shift the blame. He signed confessions, everything that was demanded of him, no longer for the sake of salvation, but simply because he saw no way out. Investigators noticed that he was beginning to lose touch with reality. He spoke incoherently, repeating the same words over and over. He showed signs of a mental breakdown. Historians believe that he went mad in prison, And this was the logical end for a man who himself drove others to madness and death. Yezhov knew there was no way out. His trial was closed. The charges were standard: treason, sabotage, conspiracy against the party. He had no real defense. Nikolai Yezhov's end was short and terrible. The man who created a system of mass terror went through it himself, to the end. Without mercy, without excuses, without hope. In 1940, he was taken to the basement where sentences had previously been carried out. The charges were read out to him, everything he himself had done to thousands of others. He remained silent, and then he said only one thing: "Kill me quickly." Those were his last words. A minute later, he was gone. No witnesses, no farewell, no grave. His body was buried in a mass grave. His name was erased from all documents. A deliberate purge of memory began. His photographs were destroyed. Pieces mentioning Yezhov were cut out of old newspapers. Even in archival photographs, he was carefully blurred or replaced with another person. History seemed to be trying to forget that he had ever existed. It was a kind of second death, the death of memory. But that was not all. Stalin went further. Yezhov's wife committed suicide, unable to bear the shame and pressure, and his adopted daughter was sent to an orphanage as the daughter of an enemy of the people. Her surname was changed, and then all traces of her were lost. In this way, the system dealt not only with the man himself, but also with his family. For many years, people tried not to talk about Yezhov. Not in textbooks, not in films, not in official speeches. Although it was under him that one of the most terrifying machines of oppression in human history was created. He became someone who was too terrifying to even remember. His name has been preserved in only one term: Yezhovshchina. Everything else has been erased.